The wind carried a lonesome tune across the vast, empty plains, a mournful whistle that seemed to seep into the very bones of Jedediah's cabin. He sat by the fire, the flickering light dancing across the weathered lines of his face, a face etched with the harshness of solitude and the quiet strength of a man long accustomed to his own company. His world was one of timber, dust, and the endless expanse of a sky that stretched from one horizon to the other, a canvas of brilliant sunrises and heart-wrenching sunsets that he had witnessed alone for more years than he cared to count. Inside, the cabin was a fortress against the encroaching loneliness, its sturdy log walls a testament to his own two hands. A rough-hewn table stood in the center, bearing the scars of countless solitary meals. A single chair, a narrow bed, and a stone hearth were the entirety of its furnishings, each object imbued with the quiet stoicism of its owner. He had carved a life for himself out of this unforgiving land, a life of silent resilience and unwavering self-reliance. Yet, in the deepest recesses of his heart, a quiet ache persisted, a yearning for a connection that the vast, empty landscape could not provide. He had sent the letter months ago, a desperate shot in the dark, a humble plea for companionship dispatched to a world far removed from his own. The reply, when it finally arrived, was a simple, folded piece of paper that held the weight of 1,000 unspoken hopes. It contained a name, May, and a date of arrival. Now he waited, his heart a tumultuous sea of anticipation and fear, the silence of the cabin amplifying the anxious thrumming in his chest. The rhythmic chopping of wood, the creak of the floorboards, the sigh of the wind, each sound was a reminder of his isolation, a stark contrast to the profound change that was about to descend upon his life. The day arrived with a biting wind that whipped dust devils across the parched earth. Jedediah stood on the porch of his cabin, his gaze fixed on the faint ribbon of road that snaked its way through the desolate landscape. He had spent the morning in a state of nervous energy, cleaning the already spotless cabin, mending a loose floorboard, and even attempting to coax a stubborn wildflower to bloom in a small pot on the windowsill. As the sun reached its zenith, a speck appeared on the horizon, a slow-moving wagon that gradually resolved into a familiar shape. It was Miller, the freight driver from the nearest town, a man of few words who served as Jedediah's infrequent link to the outside world. As the wagon drew closer, Jedediah's breath caught in his throat. Seated beside Miller was a small, slender figure, a splash of vibrant red against the drab, brown landscape. She was a beautiful Chinese woman, no older than 23, her dark hair pulled back in an intricate knot, her face a mask of exhaustion and fear. She wore a traditional red cheongsam, the silken fabric a stark and beautiful anomaly in this rough-hewn world. But it was not her beauty that struck him first. It was the ugly, purple bruise that marred the delicate skin of her cheek, a stark testament to a recent and brutal encounter. Her eyes, dark and deep, were wide with a mixture of terror and a desperate, flickering hope. In her trembling hands, she clutched a small, worn satchel and a single, folded piece of paper. A note, he presumed, the final piece of their unconventional arrangement. Miller pulled the wagon to a halt, the horses snorting and stamping in the dust. He nodded curtly to Jedediah, his expression unreadable. "This is her," he said, his voice as dry as the dust that swirled around them. May stepped down from the wagon, her movements stiff and uncertain, as if she were a fragile doll in danger of shattering. Her gaze darted around, taking in the vast, empty expanse, the simple log cabin, and the tall, silent man who stood before her. Fear radiated from her in palpable waves, a silent scream that echoed in the vast emptiness of the prairie. Jedediah's heart, a muscle long dormant and hardened by solitude, clenched with a fierce, protective instinct. He saw not a bride, not a stranger, but a wounded bird, a soul in desperate need of a safe harbor. He took a hesitant step forward, his hands, calloused and rough from years of hard labor, feeling clumsy and inadequate. He wanted to offer comfort, to erase the fear from her eyes, but the words caught in his throat. He was a man of action, not of words, and the language of tenderness was foreign to him. He cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. "Welcome," he said, his voice a low rumble, rough with disuse. May flinched at the sound, her eyes widening further. She held out the note, her hand trembling so violently that the paper rattled. He took it from her, his fingers brushing against hers, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt of warmth through his veins. The note was brief, its words a stark and brutal summary of her plight. Her name is May. She is a good worker. Her previous arrangement was unsuitable. She is now yours. The final words. She is now yours, struck a discordant note within him. He was not a man who owned people. He was a man who sought a partner, a companion to share the crushing weight of this solitary existence. He looked at her, at the bruise on her face, at the terror in her eyes, and a wave of righteous anger washed over him. He knew, without a doubt, that he would protect her, that he would shield her from the cruelty of the world that had so clearly wounded her. He gestured towards the cabin, his movements slow and deliberate, careful not to startle her. "Come," he said, his voice softer this time. "You must be tired." She hesitated for a moment, her eyes searching his face, looking for a sign, a glimmer of hope in the stoic mask of his expression. He met her gaze, his own eyes conveying a promise of safety, a silent vow of protection. Slowly, she nodded, a barely perceptible movement, and followed him into the cabin. The interior was simple and rustic, but it was clean and warm, a stark contrast to the harsh, unforgiving landscape outside. A fire crackled in the hearth, its warmth a welcome embrace against the chill of the wind. She stood in the center of the room, her small frame looking lost and out of place amidst the rough-hewn furniture. He watched her, his heart aching with a mixture of pity and a burgeoning tenderness. He wanted to say something, to offer some word of comfort, but the silence between them was a chasm, a vast and empty space that he did not know how to cross. He busied himself with mundane tasks, adding a log to the fire, fetching a dipper of water from the bucket by the door. His movements a clumsy attempt to fill the silence, to create a sense of normalcy in this most abnormal of situations. She remained motionless, her eyes fixed on the fire, her hands clutching her satchel as if it were a lifeline. He knew that her healing would be a slow and arduous process, a journey that would require patience, kindness, and a strength of will that he was not sure he possessed. But as he looked at her, at the resilient flicker of hope in her eyes, he knew that he would try. He would create a sanctuary for her in this desolate corner of the world, a place where she could finally feel safe, a place where she could finally begin to heal. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, mournful shadows across the plains, Jedediah broke the silence that had settled between them. "You're not alone now," he said. The words simple, direct, and imbued with a heartfelt earnestness that transcended the barriers of language and culture. May looked up at him, her dark eyes glistening with unshed tears. For the first time since her arrival, a flicker of something other than fear crossed her face. A glimmer of hope, a fragile tendril of trust. She did not speak, but her silence was no longer a wall of terror. It was a space of quiet contemplation, a tentative acceptance of this new and uncertain reality. He offered her a bowl of stew, a simple meal of rabbit and root vegetables that he had prepared with a care and attention to detail that he had not bestowed upon his own meals in years. She ate slowly, her movements graceful and deliberate, a stark contrast to the raw, untamed world that surrounded her. He watched her, his heart swelling with a strange and unfamiliar emotion, a feeling that was both terrifying and exhilarating. He was a man who had long prided himself on his self-sufficiency, his ability to stand alone against the harshness of the world. But as he sat across from this fragile, wounded woman, he realized that true strength was not found in solitude, but in the shared vulnerability of human connection. The night descended, a blanket of darkness studded with a million brilliant stars. He prepared a bed for her by the fire, a simple pallet of blankets and furs, a gesture of kindness that was both practical and deeply symbolic. He retreated to his own narrow bed on the other side of the room, the small space of the cabin, and in that simple, profound truth, he found a glimmer of hope, a reason to believe that even in the darkest of nights, a new day could dawn, bringing with it the promise of healing, of connection, and perhaps even of love. The days that followed were a delicate dance of unspoken understanding. Jedediah moved with a quiet reverence, a man unaccustomed to sharing his space, yet finding a strange comfort in the soft rustle of May's movements. He taught her the rhythms of his life not with words, but with actions. He showed her how to check the snares at the edge of the woods, his large, calloused hands gentle as he pointed out the tracks of a rabbit. She watched, her dark eyes observant and intelligent, absorbing every detail. In return, she brought a subtle, transformative grace to the starkness of his cabin. She swept the floor with a rhythmic motion that was almost musical, and one morning, he awoke to find a small, intricately folded paper bird sitting on the windowsill, a splash of delicate artistry in his rugged world. He never mentioned it, but he found his gaze drifting to it throughout the day, a small, silent testament to the gentle soul who now shared his home. Her bruise began to fade, the angry purple softening to a pale yellow, a visual echo of the fear that was slowly receding from her eyes. She still flinched at sudden movements, and her voice, when she did speak, was a soft, hesitant whisper. She would point to an object, a questioning look on her face, and he would provide the word. "Spoon," he would say, his voice a low rumble. "Spoon," she would repeat, the word a delicate, foreign melody on her tongue. These were their conversations, simple, direct, and yet profoundly intimate. They were building a world together, one word, one shared task at a time. The silence was no longer a chasm of loneliness, but a comfortable space filled with a shared, unspoken understanding. He found himself watching her, a strange warmth blooming in his chest. He watched the way the firelight caught the curve of her cheek, the way her small hands moved with such deftness as she mended a tear in his shirt, a task he would have clumsily patched with a piece of twine. He was a man hardened by solitude, his heart a fortress built to withstand the harshness of the world. But this gentle, resilient woman was slowly, imperceptibly, dismantling his defenses, stone by stone. Winter arrived, blanketing the plains in a sea of white. The world outside grew silent and still, forcing them into the intimate confines of the cabin. The cold was a physical presence, a constant reminder of their shared vulnerability, but the hearth fire burned brightly, a beacon of warmth and life in the frozen landscape. It was during these long, quiet days that their bond deepened, forged in the shared rhythm of survival. He would spend hours carving, the rhythmic scrape of his knife on wood a comforting sound in the stillness. He carved her a series of small animals, a deer, a wolf, a hawk, each one a perfect, miniature replica of the creatures that roamed the vast, empty land outside their door. She would line them up on the mantelpiece, her touch gentle and reverent, a slow, beautiful smile gracing her lips for the first time, a sight that made Jedediah's heart ache with a fierce, protective tenderness. She, in turn, began to share fragments of her own world. She taught him how to prepare rice, a small bag of which she had carried in her satchel, a precious link to a life that had been stolen from her. The aroma, fragrant and unfamiliar, filled the cabin, a scent of a distant land, a story of a life he could only imagine. One evening, as a blizzard raged outside, she began to hum, a soft, mournful melody that spoke of sorrow and loss, but also of a resilient, unbreakable spirit. He listened, his heart aching with a profound empathy. He did not need to understand the words to understand the story she was telling. It was a story of survival, of a spirit that had been bent but not broken. He reached out, his hand covering hers where it rested on the table. It was a simple gesture, a silent promise of comfort and safety. She did not pull away. Instead, she turned her hand over, her small fingers lacing with his, a fragile connection that felt more real, more solid, than anything he had ever known. In that moment, surrounded by the howling fury of the storm, they were two solitary souls finding refuge in each other, a tiny island of warmth and light in a vast, cold, and unforgiving world. As the snows began to melt, revealing the dormant earth beneath. A sense of hope, as fragile and tenacious as the first green shoots of spring, began to permeate the cabin. They worked together to prepare the small plot of land beside the cabin for a garden, their hands moving in a comfortable, synchronized rhythm. He broke the hard, unyielding soil with the plow, his muscles straining, while she followed behind, her small frame surprisingly strong as she broke up the clods of earth and pulled the stubborn roots of weeds. He taught her the names of the vegetables they planted: corn, beans, squash, and she would repeat them, her pronunciation becoming more confident with each passing day. It was in the shared labor of the garden, under the vast open sky, that their first real conversations began to bloom. "In my home," she said one afternoon, her voice still soft but no longer hesitant, "we grow melons. Very sweet," she smiled. A genuine, radiant smile that reached her eyes, and Jedediah felt as if the sun had broken through the clouds after a long, hard winter. "Melons?" he repeated, the word feeling foreign and full of promise on his tongue. "We'll plant some next year." It was a simple statement, but it was a promise of a future, a shared future that he had never dared to imagine for himself. Their hands would brush as they reached for a tool or a seed, and each touch was a jolt of electricity, a spark that ignited a slow-burning fire within him. He found himself looking for excuses to be near her, to catch the faint, sweet scent of her hair, to hear the soft melody of her voice. One afternoon, Miller's wagon rumbled up the road, an unwelcome intrusion into their peaceful world. The freight driver handed Jedediah a letter, his expression grim. "Word from town," he said, his eyes flicking nervously towards May, who had retreated to the porch. "A man named Blackwood has been asking about a Chinese woman. Matches her description." Jedediah's blood ran cold. He knew the name. Blackwood was a man with a reputation for cruelty, a man who saw people as possessions. The letter was a stark reminder of the world that May had escaped, a world that was now reaching out to reclaim her. The news of Blackwood cast a long, dark shadow over their burgeoning happiness. A palpable tension settled over the cabin, the comfortable silence replaced by a strained watchfulness. Jedediah found himself constantly scanning the horizon, his hand never far from the rifle that rested against the wall. He saw the fear return to May's eyes, a shadow that he had worked so hard to erase, and a cold, hard anger settled in his heart. He would not let that man touch her. He would not let that darkness extinguish the fragile light that had begun to shine within her. That evening he made a decision. He took down the small rifle, its wooden stock smooth and cool beneath his hand. He led her outside, to the open space behind the cabin where he practiced his own marksmanship. "I want to show you something," he said, his voice low and steady. He showed her how to hold the rifle, how to brace it against her shoulder, how to sight down the long barrel. She was hesitant at first, the weapon a symbol of the violence she had endured. But she trusted him. He saw it in the way she looked at him, in the way she allowed him to guide her hands, his body a protective shield around hers. "It is not for hurting," he explained, his voice a quiet murmur against her ear. "It is for protecting. For you. To be safe." He stood behind her, his arms wrapped around her as he helped her aim at a line of tin cans he had set up on a fence post. Her body was tense, but she listened to his instructions, her breathing slow and even. "Squeeze," he whispered. "Don't pull." The rifle cracked, the sound sharp and jarring in the quiet evening air. A tin can jumped and spun off the fence post. A small, startled gasp escaped her lips, followed by a slow, spreading smile of surprise and pride. They spent the next several evenings in the same way, and with each successful shot, he saw her confidence grow. She was no longer just a victim, a survivor. She was a woman discovering her own strength, her own power. One night, after they had cleaned the rifles and returned to the warmth of the cabin, she finally spoke of her past. She told him of a life of servitude, of a cruel man who had bought her as a bride only to treat her as a slave. Her words were simple, unadorned, and yet they painted a picture of such profound cruelty and despair that Jedediah's heart ached with a grief so deep it threatened to consume him. When she finished, A single tear traced a path down her cheek. He reached out and gently wiped it away, his thumb brushing against her soft skin. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, her small body trembling against his. "I won't let anyone hurt you again," he vowed, his voice thick with emotion. "I swear it." She looked up at him, her dark eyes searching his, and in their depths, he saw not just gratitude, but a love as fierce and as profound as his own. The day Jedediah had been dreading arrived with the oppressive heat of midsummer. 3 riders appeared on the horizon, their figures dark and menacing against the shimmering heat haze. Blackwood. There was no mistaking the arrogant slump of the man in the lead, a man who rode as if he owned the very land beneath his horse's hooves. Jedediah's hand tightened on the rifle he held. He had positioned May inside the cabin, the small rifle resting on the windowsill, just as they had practiced. "Stay here," he had commanded, his voice a low growl. No matter what, he strode out onto the porch, his body a solid, unmoving barrier between the approaching men and the woman he had sworn to protect. Blackwood reined in his horse a few feet from the porch, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. He was a large, brutish man, his face flushed with arrogance and cheap whiskey. "I've come for what's mine," he sneered, his eyes flicking towards the cabin door. The girl Jedediah's voice was deceptively calm, a quiet river masking a torrent of rage. "She's not a thing to be owned. She's my wife," Blackwood laughed, a harsh, grating sound that set Jedediah's teeth on edge. "I have a bill of sale that says otherwise." He made a move to dismount, but the click of Jedediah's rifle hammer stopped him cold. The 2 henchmen shifted nervously in their saddles, their hands hovering over their own holsters. "You're a long way from town, Blackwood," Jedediah said, his voice as cold and hard as the barrel of his gun. "And you're not welcome here. Turn around and ride away." For a long moment, the world held its breath. The only sounds were the buzzing of flies and the nervous stamping of the horses. Blackwood's eyes narrowed, his bravado warring with the cold, deadly promise in Jedediah's gaze. Just as the tension reached its breaking point, a sharp crack echoed from the cabin. One of Blackwood's henchmen cried out, clutching his arm where a bullet had torn through his sleeve, a deliberate, non-lethal warning shot. Blackwood's head whipped towards the cabin, his eyes wide with shock. He saw May standing in the doorway, the small rifle held steady in her hands, her face a mask of fierce, unwavering determination. The sight of her, no longer a frightened, cowering victim, but a strong, defiant woman, seemed to shatter his resolve. With a curse, he wheeled his horse around and galloped away, his men scrambling to follow. Jedediah watched them go, his rifle still raised, until they were nothing but a cloud of dust on the horizon. The danger was past. He slowly lowered his gun, his body trembling with the adrenaline that had coursed through his veins. He turned to May, who was still standing in the doorway, her eyes wide, her chest heaving. He walked towards her, his heart so full of love and pride that it felt as if it would burst. He stopped in front of her, his hands coming up to cup her face. He looked into her eyes, and in their dark depths, he saw his own reflection, his own future. He leaned down and kissed her, a kiss that was not of passion, but of reverence, of relief, of a love that had been forged in the crucible of shared hardship and quiet devotion. It was a kiss that sealed their promise, a silent vow that they were no longer 2 separate souls, but one, bound together by a love that was as vast and as enduring as the land that surrounded them.